Hello, everyone. Apologize for the lack of content recently. Had to take a bit of a break, but we're back to talk more politics, and so much has happened. Definitely enough that it needs to be broken down into sections. Today, I want to talk about foreign policy with you as it relates to the US. A lot has happened in that aspect, and the theme really is isolation for the US. You could say making enemies out of our closest allies, or at the very least, just deterring the countries that have worked with us in the past from wanting to work with us in the future. So, to that point, what happened today was the tariffs officially went live. So, you have 25% tariffs on all imports from Mexico, Canada, and China. Those went live today. And economists have talked about this as Trump talked about it on the campaign trail and since he's taken office. And the consensus is that this is going to be very damaging for the US economy as well as the other countries involved. Our prices are going to go up as a result. We've talked about that before. But beyond the price increases, you have to discuss how this affects our relationship with these countries. I mean, these are nations, when you talk about Canada, Mexico, and China, that while there might be some competition there, they're big trade partners of ours. They provide trade resources, but also energy. When you talk about Canada, a lot of technology that comes from China, and then a lot of lumber and building resources that come from Mexico as well. And seeing the prices go up on those is one thing, but just generally speaking, what the tariffs are going to do is deter those countries from wanting to do business with the US in the first place. And this is just a few of the countries as it relates to the tariffs, but there's a lot more of this going on beyond that that affects other countries as well. One thing that I want to talk about just with the concept of foreign policy, because I think that a lot of people, when they hear foreign policy, when they think about the relationship that the United States has with other countries around the world, people, they really, I think, just think about the money aspect of it, where they look at it as, especially when you talk about the America First concept that MAGA has put forward, you have this idea of, well, the US may have a lot of money, but we need to be investing that money at home purely and not, putting that money out to other countries in the world, regardless of what it's for and how beneficial that spending might be. If you do a deeper dive into it, the idea is just that we should be keeping that money at home. That's something that we'll talk more deeply about later because I agree that the money that the United States has needs to be more heavily invested at home, but I disagree that the majority of that waste is going to foreign spending. I do believe that there are many other things in this country that we waste more money on, like corporate subsidies. Just look at things like the hundreds of billions of dollars that the very wealthy people in the White House now, like Musk, are just stealing from the taxpayers. So, not to go too off track there, but getting back to it, when we talk about foreign policy, there's this thing called soft power as well, where I don't think a lot of people realize that the one of the reasons why the United States is as powerful as it is and has such a strong position with being able to negotiate with other countries around the world, it isn't just the fact that we have the strongest military and a lot of influence in terms of wealth. Those are strong reasons for sure. But the idea of soft power is that when we spend these things, this money on programs in other countries, whether you talk about foreign aid or programs like reducing infectious diseases and improving research and conditions of life in other nations, is we have strong relationships with these people as a result, in situations where we otherwise wouldn't have very strong relationships with a lot of countries around the world, especially when you look at Europe, African and Caribbean nations, and things of that nature, even a lot of Latin countries. We have strong relationships with them, not because we have, boots on the ground in those countries all the time and things of that nature. It's simply because we have these mutual investments, even if in a lot of instances the US might be putting more money into these countries than vice versa. It's beneficial in the sense that when we need something from them, or even just in terms of when we do want to have relationships trade wise or have folks safely travel to and from these countries, we can be confident about that because of the relationships that we have. The United States has a history of some more oppressive actions, towards other nations across the world, which has, it's built up a strong reputation of the United States can be the good guy or the bad guy. And where we invest our attention and our money speaks to who we want our allies to be and who we want to have positive relationships with. It gives us the influence that we know that we have had for a long time, but I think now people are starting to take for granted. You are most certainly going to see with the actions that Trump is taking, just cutting off countries left and right and taking oppressive action toward them, that they're not going to want to do business with the US anymore. Some people might think that that's fine. I know people that will say, well, the United States is powerful. We don't need other countries to begin with. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that over time you'll see the negative effects that the lack of relationships around the world has. I don't think that that kind of economic and political isolation is healthy at all. But even beyond that, I firmly believe that these nations, they want to have our back and we should have their back with these long-term allies and things of that nature. But what you're going to see is there are other powerful nations that we have competition with. China is the primary example. But you're leaving this really big gap where the United States has had, we have been, the proponent of all of these programs for decades. All of these nations look to the U.S. for leadership, for support, and things of that nature. And you're going to have nations like China and the UK fill in those gaps. The countries that we've had strong relationships with in the past that we're now pushing away with things like tariffs and the revoking of foreign aid are going to go to these countries like China and the UK, and that's going to allow them to usurp us in a lot of ways. They're going to be able to gain more economic control, especially China, when other countries start to turn to them because the United States has cut them off, is going to make them more powerful. I just find this particularly ironic because Trump, being president now, does consider China to be a very large threat. He always talks about how China is stealing our jobs and things of that nature, but this is really just going to magnify those effects. If you did believe that China was taking our jobs before, that's only going to get worse. When you talk about things like, one of Biden's biggest accomplishments was the CHIPS Act, right? He really heavily invested in the development of chips and technology, modern technology in America, and that creates a lot of jobs for one thing, but it also gives us an up on those, up and coming tech industries to know that we're leading the charge in the research and the investments and things of that nature. And Trump did recently just turn around and cancel the bill altogether. That just really just turns everything back to China and Taiwan, allows them to have control over those areas. And while Trump is, trying to partner with Taiwan now, that's not, I mean, they're an enemy of China as well. So China still, takes the largest win in this situation, and it's just unnecessary. We had a very good plan to invest in this industry and create the jobs here in the US, and we turned it back over to China. Going back to the tariffs, that's where this concept applies. I mean, Mexico and Canada are just our direct neighbors. The trade relationships that we have with them are crucial. And, we've had their backs and they've had our backs for a very long time. Us putting these tariffs in place when these countries didn't do anything wrong is really a huge slap in the face, to not just their leadership, but their people as well. Just like we will feel the economic impacts of these tariffs, the citizens of Mexico and Canada will feel the impact as well. And it's creating enemies of these nations in a scenario that it really just wasn't necessary, and the justification for it isn't there. If you ask MAGA why we need to put these tariffs in place, Trump tells you it's because, I mean, he believes it's going to make the country more money. But even in any aspect that that could be true, that would simply be just money going directly into the treasury for the rich people that are already in the White House to hoard. That money in no way goes into investing in this nation, and like we already talked about, it raises the prices for the citizens that live here. In addition, it takes these countries that are our neighbors and de-incentivizes them to do business with us moving forward. It pushes them to other nations like China as well. And the justification kind of got off track there. I apologize for that. MAGA would give you is that it's the drug war, right? So they say that you have fentanyl, and all these terrible drugs coming in through primarily Mexico, because Canada is hardly even a factor in that aspect, and that these tariffs are supposed to force them to kind of rein that in a way. It just doesn't do that. I mean, the tariffs, there's no connection there. They don't relate at all. Trump and the president of Mexico have already had conversations about how they want to combat the cartels, and the president of Mexico has agreed to support us in that. Not that she wasn't already doing that job, but she's, double down on it because that's what Trump wanted to hear from her, and she was willing to work with him on that. But even after that, these tariffs are still going into place, and the relationship just isn't there. So you have all of that going on with our closest partners, and then we have to talk about what happened with Ukraine recently. So we know that President Zelensky came and met with Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office recently, and the intention was for them to sign this mineral deal, which in my opinion is predatory at face value. Trump is asking for, I think it's near $500 billion in the resources that the natural resources that Ukraine has. Probably the most major factor that they have for their economy. We want to take advantage. He wants to take advantage of that. The United States taking that money from them in terms of their resource banks, but then also in perpetuity, just he wants to take half of all the minerals that is produced from that nation forever. So really, really detrimental in terms of the economics for Ukraine. It kind of forces them to be joined at the hip with the United States in perpetuity if they want to stay afloat as a nation. But at the same time, they haven't really had much option with the war that they face with Russia, and constantly losing ground, and then facing lack of support now that Trump has taken office, because he hasn't had their back to the degree that Biden did, and just other politicians on both sides of the aisle have had for Ukraine in general, because it's really just MAGA that's against this. Most Democrats and Republicans do agree that we should have their back in defending democracy and preventing Russia from taking over their nation. But so we forced Ukraine into that position, and despite the predatory nature of the deal, Zelensky was willing to work with Trump on that, and it seemed like he was going to take the deal. He came to speak with Trump and Vance about that in the Oval Office, and the crazy part about it is he really just wanted some answers as to, well, we're willing to take this deal, but I would like to know what the plan is moving forward. Trump was just saying, you're going to do this for us, and we're going to make sure that Putin agrees to a ceasefire. Zelensky's issue with that is, if you didn't know, when the conditions of this war started, they were already in a ceasefire. Ukraine and Russia had reached a ceasefire agreement, I think it was a little bit over a decade ago, and this was in place for some time, but over many, many years recently, you saw Russia start to break those ceasefire agreements. So they had been slowly but surely creeping into Ukraine, putting soldiers on the border, and then it became, slowly but surely a full-on invasion as lives started to be taken and things of that nature. So Zelensky's concern, I think understandably, is, we've already had a ceasefire. So what are the real guarantees under this agreement that this, piece of paper will prevent Putin from trying to steal more land later down the line, once we've already given the United States all that we could offer? If Putin then backs out on his word, what happens then? For whatever reason, Vance and Trump found this question to be disrespectful, and they, in turn, disrespected Zelensky publicly in front of the entire world, calling him unready for peace, saying that he doesn't want to end the war. They called him a dictator in recent times as well. Just these really absurd things, as if Zelensky isn't a democratically elected president, just like Trump was. Calling him a dictator and then saying that he doesn't want peace, as if him and the Ukrainian people don't want peace more than anybody else in the world. They don't want to be fighting this war and losing land just so they can defend their nation. They have to sacrifice thousands of lives. It's not fair to them to accuse them of not wanting to end this war. I feel like I understand that Zelensky wants the war to end, but he doesn't want to sacrifice all of Ukraine's economy without a proper guarantee that this war will actually be coming to an end. So that situation went terribly. Trump followed up by kicking Zelensky out of the White House. I think Zelensky handled it very maturely. He had a great interview with Fox News, of all people, who, to their credit, actually gave him an opportunity to say what he needed to say. They, being Fox, were still biased with their line of questioning, but it definitely could have been worse. So they gave him an opportunity to say what he needed to say, and I think it really painted the picture that Trump was really just acting like a child. Zelensky handled this entire situation so much more maturely than he did, and it was really unfortunate to watch play out. It feels embarrassing as a citizen of the United States of America to watch our leader behave this way and cut off our allies left and right with no real rhyme or reason to it. So you have that, and then I think it was yesterday, it may have even been more recent than that, that Trump announced that he was cutting off the aid to Ukraine altogether. So he's leaving them helpless, to fight or lose, against Putin in general. We are fortunate where the UK is, they may step up, and put some boots on the ground and help Ukraine in a more meaningful way. But even they may, they had floated the concept of willing to do certain things if the United States was willing to do certain things as well. And we'll have to see. I mean, we would hope that they will aid Ukraine as a European nation, regardless of what America chooses to do. But it's still really disappointing to see that this is the path that Trump decided to go down with this. So overall, it's just it's a mess. The way that we're treating these countries. You have all of that with these being our allies, and then just on a daily basis, I mean, Trump is saying things like, you know, he wants to steal Greenland, just buy the whole country for an absurdly low cost because he wants the resources that are there, as if they don't have their own government and people that live there. He just wants to take the whole thing. He wants to take Panama because Panama doesn't want to give up the Panama Canal. He says, well, if you don't want to do that, we'll just take the whole nation. I don't even know what he means by these things. I mean, because the implication obviously is war. He seems to be under the impression that it's just business, that like he can throw out a dollar amount and all of a sudden these nations will be willing to become states of the United States of America, which is absurd. We know that's not how it works, but the rhetoric that he uses and the way that he talks about it is very forceful. He's talked about stealing Gaza, as we know, just complete ethnic cleansing, kicking everybody who's ever lived there out, rebuilding it. He posted a video on Twitter of making it like it was an AI video of turning Gaza into Trump Gaza, just gold everywhere, making it a haven for foreigners to come in and have this prime vacation destination, as if there aren't millions of people who called that nation home. He would just take it from them because that's what Israel wants. He's threatening, them. He's not stopping Israel, but he's also threatening to just have people go, our people, put boots on the ground to go over there, take the nation so that the United States can own it. And at the same time, he's floating reinvading Afghanistan. These are things that I know that the majority of Americans do not want, and they know that these ideas are absurd, but they listen to Trump say them, and I don't know if it's that people don't take him seriously or they believe that these things, he might say them, but they'll never actually come to pass. We have to take these things seriously. I mean, when Trump takes these threats, again, this man has no bounds, no checks or boundaries to stop him from doing whatever he wants. We really need to speak up against these acts of oppression and even just the rhetoric of it. They lie all the time. They told you guys that they weren't going to cut Medicare and Social Security. They told you guys that all of these wars and issues would be ended on day one. Obviously, those things haven't happened. They cut $800 billion in Medicare. That's going to destroy the elderly sector of this country and the disabled sectors of this country, and people that are just relying on Medicaid because they don't make enough to pay for these insane and medical costs. I know how that feels, unfortunately. These people are getting put in terrible positions. They're making cuts to Social Security when they said they wouldn't, putting people's retirement at risk, even though it's us that invest that money into it over the course of our lives. They have no issue taking that money away from us. You need to take these people seriously. It doesn't just matter when they say something and if they say, "Oh, we're not going to hurt this and we're going to fight for you on this." They lie all the time. If you follow the actions, you know, a lot of people think that because Trump isn't a generic politician, that he's more honest than the politicians that we're used to, because we know politicians are historically dishonest. I won't deny that. But Trump puts those people to he makes them look like saints. I mean, the rate at which he lies is it's really as if he says more falsehoods than truths just on a daily basis. If you follow the things that he says, he makes stuff up all the time. And then not only that, he just blatantly says he's not going to do things that he turns around and does. He said he hasn't done things that he turns around and does. Just let's real quickly talk about the Epstein files. These guys told you that they were going to put out the Epstein files unredacted and expose the secrets, the dark secrets of America, right? And put them out there for everybody to see. I would have loved that, but I knew it wasn't going to happen because Trump and everyone in the White House, they're the richest robber barons on the planet. These were Epstein's best friends when he was alive. These are the people that would have the most to lose if the Epstein files were to actually come out. And they just lied about it on a daily basis and made it seem like they were going to put them out. They delayed it when that day came, and then when they finally put them out, you know what happened? It was just information that the people already had. They had taken just little parts of Epstein's black book, which are already public to the entire world, and redacted even more information than we had already had. So they presented with us information we already knew, took information out of that because it made them look bad, and then said, "Here you go, these are the Epstein files you've been waiting on." What really disappoints me is it's such an obvious lie. If you did any research whatsoever, you could tell that it was no revelation, it was pure deception, but people really, really buy into this stuff. And that is exactly why these conversations are important. It's exactly why that we need to speak up against every lie that we hear and challenge this constant misinformation. It truly is sad to see people become so enveloped in these lies and believe them at face value. So, gonna cut it off there. I wanted to get that out of the way. I'll have more content coming to you shortly because so much has gone on lately. But thank you guys for coming back and joining me. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you again soon.